6, 5, 4, 3. Ignition. 3, 2, 1. 0. Roger. Liftoff. Liftoff. The Fox is away.
This is your Colbycast, a weekly roundup of news from the Colbyjack.net world headquarters, flavored with a healthy dose of fiction.
Hello, and welcome to Colbycast 26 for June 8th, 2011. I am PM Wilson. It's been another quiet news week here at the Colbycast studios, but that doesn't mean we aren't writing and recording very hard, because we are. We are putting our noses to the keyboard and mic in preparation for the relaunch of Colbyjack.net on August 1st. So, more about the countdown to relaunch time. The Mouse Queen re-recordings, which will be the first book in our relaunch, is going very well. Bob is counting down the chapters until he is done re-recording. He's very happy with the audio quality. If you like the way the Colbycast stories sound, you will not be disappointed. The Mouse Queen will be presented in 13 episodes, which will premiere on August 1st and run through October 24th. Speaking of the Mouse Queen, Captain Bear has been suspended from this podcast indefinitely, pending a court-martial for conduct unbecoming of a stuffed officer. Evidently, the last time he was on the air, he damaged the studio's flux capacitor. In addition, the studio's Spin Dizzy drive is missing, along with our entire supply of booster spice. To further aggravate matters, Captain Bear attempted to start a swearing bear meme. He said, and I quote, "If a Pop-Tart cat can have his day in the sun, and it is time for this bear to swear." He refused not only legal counsel, but also illegal counsel, and illegitimate counsel as well. Under, over, and around pain of torture, Bear refuses to answer any questions pertaining to his conduct and the damaged equipment. All he's giving us is his name, rank, serial number, and the measurements for his uniform. So barring the return or repair of the before-mentioned equipment, he will be held pending court-martial in the Horcrux storage facility beneath the Colbycast studio. We will keep you up to date on any further developments as they happen. In other news, in addition to re-recording The Mouse Queen, Bob is also hard at work recording Cory Doctorow's novel, For the Win, which will be released starting Friday, August 5th. For the Win is a tale of video games, gold mining, and labor unions, set against the boardrooms of the West and the slums of the developing world. This tale is scheduled to run through the end of the year. If you are intrigued or just can't wait, head on over to Cory Doctorow's website, craphound.com, for more information. There you can get access to free ebook versions or follow the links to buying real or virtual copies of the book. If you partake of the free ebook and wish to offer something in return, Cory has a list of libraries and schools that want a physical copy but can't afford one. Just head over to craphound.com and follow the links. Enough about Bob for now. He doesn't do everything around here. I've been working very hard on my stories too. Currently, Death of a Shade Dame is running on Mondays and Fridays and will continue its run until July 18th. Death of a Shady Dame is a tale of murder and flowers in a small town in central Wisconsin. If you like goats, murder, and unexpected thefts, you'll love this story. Upon the completion of Death of a Shady Dame, Colbyjack.net Serial Tales will be presenting The Nut Heist. The Nut Heist is a story of squirrels, chipmunks, and a power-hungry villain, all locked in a desperate battle of will. It will launch on July 22nd and run for only 3 episodes. The Nut Heist is in the final review/editing stage. This stage is right before the recording stage, so recording will happen very soon. The Nut Heist is our last production before the relaunch. In addition, Bob has finally read my book, Nightmare, and he said, and I quote, "Best work ever. I found it hard to believe it wasn't from a real book by a real author." Nightmare is a story of a driven woman tracking down the perfect serial killer. Will she be able to stop him before he commits the ultimate murder? As it has passed the plot hole detection pass, Nightmare is now entering the first pass edit phase in preparation for its podcast debut on Halloween. We couldn't think of a more fitting release date for this story than Halloween. Now, for all of our faithful Colbycast listeners, we'd like you to know that for the foreseeable future, Colbycast will have a touch of news about 8 to 10 minutes, followed by a short story or serial. They will continue to appear on Wednesdays, though, so don't worry about that. As this has been a recent change, we wanted to keep you informed about what's going on. A touch of news followed by a tale is the perfect cure for the midweek blahs. Now to the story. The Eyes Have It by Randall Garrett. Randall Garrett was a prolific contributor to Astounding and other science fiction magazines of the 1950s and 60s. He instructed Robert Silverberg in the techniques of selling large quantities of action-adventure science fiction, and collaborated with him on 2 novels about Earth bringing civilization to an alien planet. Garrett is best known for the Lord Darcy books, the novel Too Many Magicians, and 2 short story collections set in an alternate world where a joint Anglo-French empire, led by a Plantagenet dynasty, has survived into the 20th century. A world where magic works and has been scientifically codified. The Eyes Have It is the first of the Lord Darcy tales. It originally appeared in Analog Science Fact and Fiction in January of 1964. And was made available thanks to Project Gutenberg. We are presenting this tale in 3 parts. Now let's journey back to the days of Never-When, in the lands of Neverwhere, with the first installment of The Eyes Have It by Randall Garrett.
The Eyes Have It by Randall Garrett. Sir Pierre Marlet, Chevalier of the Agneva Empire, Knight of the Golden Leopard, and Secretary in private to my lord the Count d'Evreux, pushed back the lace at his cuff for a glance at his wristwatch. 3 minutes of 7. The Angelus had rung at 6, as always, and my Lord Devereux had been awakened by it, as always. At least, Sir Pierre could not remember any time in the past 17 years when my lord had not awakened at the Angelus. Once, he recalled, the sacristan had failed to ring the bell, and the Count had been furious for a week. Only the intercession of Father Bright, backed by the bishop himself, had saved the sacristan from doing a turn in the dungeons of Castle Devereux. Sir Pierre stepped out into the corridor, walked along the carpeted flagstones, and cast a practiced eye around him as he walked. These old castles were difficult to keep clean, and my lord the Count was fussy about nitre, collecting in the seams between the stones of the walls. All appeared quite in order, which was a good thing. My lord the Count had been making a night of it last evening. That always made him the more peevish in the morning. Though he always woke at the Angelus, he did not always wake up sober. Sir Pierre stopped before a heavy, polished, carved oak door, selected a key from one of the many at his belt, and turned it in the lock. Then he went into the elevator, and the door locked automatically behind him. He pressed the switch and waited in patient silence as he was lifted up 4 floors to the Count's personal suite. By now, my lord the Count would have bathed, shaved, and dressed. He would also have poured down an eye-opener consisting of half a water glass of fine champagne brandy. He would not eat breakfast until 8. The Count had no valet in the strict sense of the term. Sir Reginald Beauvais held that title, but he was never called upon to exercise the more personal functions of his office. The Count did not like to be seen until he was thoroughly presentable. The elevator stopped. Sir Pierre stepped out into the corridor and walked along it toward the door at the far end. At exactly 7 o'clock, he rapped briskly on the great door which bore the gilt and polychrome arms of the House Devereux. For the first time in 17 years, there was no answer. Sir Pierre waited for the growled command to enter for a full minute, unable to believe his ears. Then, almost timidly, he rapped again. There was still no answer. Then, bracing himself for the verbal onslaught that would follow if he had erred, Sir Pierre turned the handle and opened the door, just as if he had heard the Count's voice telling him to come in. "Good morning, my lord," he said, as he always had for 17 years. But the room was empty, and there was no answer. He looked around the huge room. The morning sunlight streamed in through the high, mullioned windows and spread a diamond-checkered pattern across the tapestry on the far wall, lighting up the brilliant hunting scene in a blaze of color. "My lord?" Nothing, not a sound. The bedroom door was open. Sir Pierre walked across to it and looked in. He saw immediately why my lord the Count had not answered, and that, indeed, he would never answer again. My lord the Count lay flat on his back, his arms spread wide, his eyes staring at the ceiling. He was still clad in his gold and scarlet evening clothes, but the great stain on the front of his coat was not the same shade of scarlet as the rest of the cloth, and the stain had a bullet hole in its center. Sir Pierre looked at him without moving for a long moment. Then he stepped over, knelt, and touched one of the Count's hands with the back of his own. It was quite cool. He had been dead for hours. "I knew someone would do you in sooner or later, my lord," said Sir Pierre, almost regretfully. Then he rose from his kneeling position and walked out without another look at his dead lord. He locked the door of the suite, pocketed the key, and went back downstairs in the elevator. Mary, Lady Duncan, stared out of the window at the morning sunlight and wondered what to do. The Angelus bell had awakened her from a fitful sleep in her chair, and she knew that, as a guest at Castle Devereux, she would be expected to appear at Mass again this morning. But how could she? How could she face the sacramental Lord on the altar, to say nothing of taking the Blessed Sacrament itself? Still, it would look all the more conspicuous if she did not show up this morning, after having made it a point to attend every morning with Lady Alice during the first 4 days of this visit. She turned and glanced at the locked and barred door of the bedroom. He would not be expected to come. Laird Duncan used his wheelchair as an excuse. But since he had taken up black magic as a hobby he had, she suspected, been actually afraid to go anywhere near a church. If only she hadn't lied to him. But how could she have told the truth? That would have been worse. Infinitely worse. And now, because of that lie, he was locked in his bedroom doing only God and the devil knew what. If only he would come out. If he would only stop whatever it was he had been doing all these long hours, or at least finish it, then they could leave Evreux, make some excuse, any excuse, to get away. One of them could feign sickness. Anything to get them out of France, across the Channel, and back to Scotland, where it would be safe. She looked back out of the window, across the courtyard, at the towering stone walls of the great keep, and at the high window that opened into the suite of Edouard Count Devereux. Last night she had hated him, but no longer. Now there was only room in her heart for fear. She buried her face in her hands and cursed herself for a fool. There were no tears left for weeping, not after the long night. Behind her, she heard the sudden noise of the door being unlocked, and she turned. Laird Duncan of Duncan opened the door and wheeled himself out. He was followed by a malodorous gust of vapor from the room he had just left. Lady Duncan stared at him. He looked older than he had last night, more haggard and worn, and there was something in his eyes she did not like. For a moment he said nothing. Then he wet his lips with the tip of his tongue. When he spoke, his voice sounded dazed. "There is nothing to fear any more," he said. "Nothing to fear at all." The Reverend Father James Valois Bright, vicar of the chapel of St. Esprit, had as his flock the several hundred inhabitants of the Castle Devereux. As such, he was the ranking priest. Socially, not hierarchically. In the country, not counting the bishop and the chapter at the cathedral, of course. But such knowledge did little good for the father's peace of mind. The turnout of the flock was abominably small for its size, especially for weekday masses. The Sunday masses were well attended, of course. Count Devereux was there punctually at 9 every Sunday, and he had a habit of counting the house. But he never showed up on weekdays, and his laxity had allowed a certain further laxity to filter down through the ranks. The great consolation was Lady Alice Devereux. She was a plain, simple girl, nearly 20 years younger than her brother, the Count, and quite his opposite in every way. She was quiet where he was thundering, self-effacing where he was flamboyant, temperate where he was drunken, and chaste where he was. Father Bright brought his thoughts to a full halt for a moment. He had, he reminded himself, no right to make judgments of that sort. He was not, after all, the Count's confessor. The bishop was. Besides, he should have his mind on his prayers just now. He paused, and was rather surprised to notice that he had already put on his alb, amice, and girdle, and he was aware that his lips had formed the words of the prayer as he had donned each of them. Habit, he thought, can be destructive to the contemplative faculty. He glanced around the sacristy. His server, the young son of the Count of St. Brieuc, sent here to complete his education as a gentleman who would someday be the king's governor of one of the most important counties in Brittany, was pulling his surplice down over his head. The clock said 7:11. Father Bright forced his mind heavenward and repeated silently the vesting prayers that his lips had formed meaninglessly, this time putting his full intentions behind them. Then he added a short mental prayer asking God to forgive him for allowing his thoughts to stray in such a manner. He opened his eyes and reached for his chasuble just as the sacristy door opened and Sir Pierre, the Count's privy secretary, stepped in. "I must speak to you, Father," he said in a low voice. And glancing at the young de St. Brieuc, he added, "Alone." Normally, Father Bright would have reprimanded anyone who presumed to break into the sacristy as he was vesting for Mass. But he knew that Sir Pierre would never interrupt without good reasons. He nodded and went outside in the corridor that led to the altar. "What is it, Pierre?" he asked. "My lord, the Count is dead, murdered." After the first momentary shock, Father Bright realized that the news was not, after all, totally unexpected. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, it seemed he had always known that the Count would die by violence long before debauchery ruined his health. "Tell me about it," he said quietly. Sir Pierre reported exactly what he had done and what he had seen. "Then I locked the door and came straight here," he told the priest. "Who else has the key to the Count's suite?" Father Bright asked. "No one but my lord himself," Sir Pierre answered. "At least as far as I know." "Where is his key?" "Still in the ring at his belt. I noticed that particularly." "Very good. We'll leave it locked. You're certain the body was cold?" "Cold and waxy, Father." "Then he's been dead many hours." "Lady Alice will have to be told," Sir Pierre said. Father Bright nodded. "Yes, the Countess d'Evreux must be informed of her succession to the county seat." He could tell by the sudden momentary blank look that came over Sir Pierre's face that the Privy Secretary had not yet realized fully the implications of the Count's death. "I'll tell her, Pierre. She should be in her pew by now. Just step into the church and tell her quietly that I want to speak to her. Don't tell her anything else." "I understand, Father," said Sir Pierre. There were only 25 or 30 people in the pews, most of them women. But Alice, Countess d'Evreux, was not one of them. Sir Pierre walked quietly and unobtrusively down the side aisle and out into the narthex. She was standing there, just inside the main door, adjusting the black lace mantilla about her head, as though she had just come in from outside. Suddenly, Sir Pierre was very glad he would not have to be the one to break the news. She looked rather sad, as always, her plain face unsmiling. The jutting nose and square chin which had given her brother, the Count, a look of aggressive handsomeness, only made her look very solemn and rather sexless, although she had a magnificent figure. "My lady," Sir Pierre said, stepping towards her, "the Reverend Father would like to speak to you before Mass. He's waiting at the sacristy door." He held her rosary clutched tightly to her breast and gasped. Then she said, "Oh, Sir Pierre, I'm sorry. You've quite surprised me. I didn't see you." "My apologies, my lady." "It's all right. My thoughts were elsewhere. Will you take me to the good Father?" Father Bright heard their footsteps coming down the corridor before he saw them. He was a little fidgety because Mass was already a minute overdue. It should have started promptly at 7:15. The new Countess d'Evreux took the news calmly, as he had known she would. After a pause, she crossed herself and said, "May his soul rest in peace. I will leave everything in your hands, Father. Sir Pierre, what are we to do?" Pierre must get on the Telson to Rouen immediately and report the matter to His Highness. I will announce your brother's death and ask for prayers for his soul. But I think I need to say nothing about the manner of his death. There is no need to arouse any more speculation and fuss than necessary. "Very well," said the Countess. "Come, Sir Pierre. I will speak to the Duke, my cousin, myself." "Yes, my lady." Father Bright returned to the sacristy, opened the missal, and changed the placement of the ribbons. Today was an ordinary feria. A votive Mass would not be forbidden by the rubrics. The clock said 7:17. He turned to young de Saint Brieuc, who was waiting respectfully. "Quickly, my son. Go and get the unbleached beeswax candles and put them on the altar. Be sure you light them before you put out the white ones. Hurry now. I will be ready by the time you come back. Oh yes. And change the altar frontal. Put on the black." "Yes, Father." And the lad was gone. Father Bright folded the green chasuble and returned it to the drawer, then took out the black one. He would say a requiem for the souls of all the faithful departed, and hope that the Count was among them. His Royal Highness, the Duke of Normandy, looked over the official letter his secretary had just typed for him. It was addressed to Serenissimus Dominus Nostrus Ionis Quartus de Gracia Anglia Francia Scotia Hibernia et Novia Anglia Rex Imperator Fide Defensor. Our most serene Lord, John IV, by the grace of God, King and Emperor of England, France, Scotland, Ireland, and New England, defender of the faith. It was a routine matter, simple notification to his brother, the King, that His Majesty's most faithful servant, Edward, Count of Evreux, had departed this life, and asking His Majesty's confirmation of the Count's heir-in-law, Alice, Countess of Evreux, as his lawful successor. His Highness finished reading, nodded, and scrawled his signature at the bottom, Richard Dux Normandie. Then, on a separate piece of paper, he wrote, "Dear John, may I suggest you hold up on this for a while. Edward was a leecher and a slob, and I have no doubt he got everything he deserved. But we have no notion who killed him. For any evidence I have to the contrary, it might have been Alice who pulled the trigger. I will send you full particulars as soon as I have them. With much love, your brother and servant, Richard. He put both papers into a prepared envelope and sealed it. He wished he could have called the king on the Telson, but no one had yet figured out how to get the wires across the channel. He looked absently at the sealed envelope, his handsome blonde features thoughtful. The house of Plantagenet had endured for 8 centuries, and the blood of Henry of Anjou ran thin in its veins. But the Norman strain was as strong as ever, having been replenished over the centuries by fresh infusions from Norwegian and Danish princesses. Richard's mother, Queen Helga, wife to his late Majesty Henry X, spoke very few words of Anglo-French, and those with a heavy Norse accent. Nevertheless, there was nothing Scandinavian in the language, manner, or bearing of Richard, Duke of Normandy. Not only was he a member of the oldest and most powerful ruling family of Europe, but he bore a Christian name that was distinguished even in that family. 7 kings of the empire had borne the name, and most of them had been good kings, if not always good men in the nicey-nice sense of the word. Even old Richard I, who had been pretty wild during the first 40-odd years of his life, had settled down to do a magnificent job of kinging for the next 20 years. The long and painful recovery from the wound he received at the siege of Chaluz had made a change in him for the better. There was a chance that Duke Richard might be called upon to uphold the honor of that name as king. By law, Parliament must elect a Plantagenet as king in the event of the death of the present sovereign. And while the election of one of the king's 2 sons, the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Lancaster, was more likely than the election of Richard, he was certainly not eliminated from the succession. Meantime, he would uphold the honor of his name as Duke of Normandy. Murder had been done. Therefore, justice must be done. The Count Devereux had been known for his stern but fair justice, almost as well as he had been known for his profligacy. And just as his pleasures had been without temperance, so his justice had been untempered by mercy. Whoever had killed him would find both justice and mercy, insofar as Richard had it within his power to give it. Although he did not formulate it in so many words, even mentally, Richard was of the opinion that some debauched woman or cuckolded man had fired the fatal shot. Thus he found himself inclining toward mercy before he knew anything substantial about the case at all. Richard dropped the letter he was holding into the special mail pouch that would be placed aboard the evening trans-channel packet, and then turned in his chair to look at the lean, middle-aged man working at a desk across the room. "My Lord Marquis," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, Your Highness?" said the Marquis of Rouen, looking up. "How true are the stories one has heard about the late Count?" "True, Your Highness," the Marquis said thoughtfully. "I would hesitate to make any estimate of percentages. Once a man gets a reputation like that, the number of his reputed sins quickly surpasses the number of actual ones. Doubtless, many of the stories one hears are of whole cloth. Others may have only a slight basis, in fact. On the other hand, it is highly likely that there are many of which we have never heard. It is absolutely certain, however, that he has acknowledged 7 illegitimate sons, and I dare say he has ignored a few daughters, and these, mind you, with unmarried women. His adulteries would be rather more difficult to establish, but I think Your Highness can take it for granted that such escapades were far from uncommon." He cleared his throat and then added, "If Your Highness is looking for motive, I fear there is a superabundance of persons with motive." "I see," the Duke said. "Well, we will wait and see what information Lord Darcy comes up with." He looked up at the clock. "They should be there by now." Then, as if brushing further thoughts on the subject from his mind, he went back to work, picking up a new sheaf of state papers from his desk. The Marquis watched him for a moment and smiled a little to himself. The young Duke took his work seriously, but was well balanced about it. A little inclined to be romantic. But aren't we all at 19? There was no doubt of his ability, nor of his nobility. The royal blood of England always came through. "My lady," said Sir Pierre gently, "the Duke's investigators have arrived." My Lady Alice, Countess d'Evreux, was seated in a gold brocade upholstered chair in the small receiving room off the great hall. Standing near her, looking very grave, was Father Bright. Against the blaze of color on the walls of the room, the two of them stood out like ink blots. Father Bright wore his normal clerical black, unrelieved except for the pure white lace at collar and cuffs. The Countess wore unadorned black velvet, a dress which she had had to have altered hurriedly by her dressmaker. She had always hated black, and owned only the mourning she had worn when her mother died 8 years before. The somber look on their faces seemed to make the black blacker. "Show them in, Sir Pierre," the Countess said calmly. Sir Pierre opened the door wider, and 3 men entered. One was dressed as one gently born. The other 2 wore the livery of the Duke of Normandy. The gentleman bowed. "I am Lord Darcy, Chief Criminal Investigator for His Highness, the Duke, and your servant, my lady." He was a tall, brown-haired man in his 30s, with a rather handsome, lean face. He spoke Anglo-French with a definite English accent. "My pleasure, Lord Darcy," said the Countess. "This is our vicar, Father Bright." "Your servant, Reverend Sir." Then he presented the 2 men with him. The first was a scholarly-looking graying man wearing pince-nez glasses with gold rims. Dr. Patley, physician. The second, a tubby, red-faced, smiling man, was Master Sean O'Loughlin, sorcerer. As soon as Master Sean was presented, he removed a small leather-bound folder from his belt patch and proffered it to the priest. "My license, Reverend Father." Father Bright took it and glanced over it. It was the usual thing, signed and sealed by the Archbishop of Rouen. The law was rather strict on that point. No sorcerer could practice without the permission of the Church, and the license was given only after careful examination for orthodoxy of practice. "It seems to be quite in order, Master Sean," said the priest, handing the folder back. The tubby little sorcerer bowed his thanks and returned the folder to his belt pouch. Lord Darcy had a notebook in his hand. "Now, unpleasant as it may be, we shall have to check on a few facts." He consulted his notes, then looked up at Sir Pierre. "You, I believe, discovered the body." "That is correct, your lordship." "How long ago was this?" Sir Pierre glanced at his wristwatch. It was 9:55. "Not quite 3 hours ago, your lordship." "At what time, precisely?" "I rapped on the door precisely at 7, and went in a minute or 2 later, say 7:01 or 7:02. "How do you know the time so exactly?" "My lord, the Count," said Pierre with some stiffness, "insisted upon exact punctuality. I have formed the habit of referring to my watch regularly. I see. Very good. Now, what did you do then? Sir Pierre described his actions briefly. The door to his suite was not locked then, Darcy asked. No, sir. You did not expect it to be locked? No, sir. It has not been for 17 years. Lord Darcy raised one eyebrow in a polite query. Never? Not at 7 o'clock, your lordship. My lord the Count always rose promptly at 6 and unlocked the door before 7. He did lock it at night, then? Yes, sir. Lord Darcy looked thoughtful and made a note. But he said nothing more on that subject. When you left, you locked the door? That is correct, your lordship. And it has remained locked ever since? Sir Pierre hesitated and glanced at Father Bright. The priest said, At 8:15, Sir Pierre and I went in. I wished to view the body. We touched nothing. We left at 8:20. Master Sean O'Loughlin looked agitated. Excuse me, Reverend Sir. You didn't give him holy unction, I hope. No, said Father Bright. I thought it would be better to delay that until after the authorities has seen the scene of the crime. I wouldn't want to make the gathering of evidence any more difficult than necessary. Quite right, murmured Lord Darcy. No blessings, I trust, Reverend Sir. Master Sean persisted. No exorcisms or... Nothing, Father Bright interrupted somewhat testily. I believe I crossed myself when I saw the body, but nothing more. Crossed yourself, sir? Nothing else? No. Well, that's all right then. Sorry to be so persistent, Reverend Sir, but any miasma of evil that may be left around is a very important clue, and it shouldn't be dispersed until it's been checked, you see. Evil? My lady the Countess looked shocked. Sorry, my lady, but... Master Sean began contritely. But Father Bright interrupted by speaking to the Countess. Don't distress yourself, my daughter. These men are only doing their duty. Of course, I understand. It's just that it's so... She shuddered delectantly. Lord Darcy gave Master Sean a warning look, then asked politely, Has my lady seen the deceased? No, she said. I will, however, if you wish. We'll see, said Lord Darcy. Perhaps it won't be necessary. May we go up to the suite now? Certainly, the Countess said. Sir Pierre, if you will? Yes, my lady. As Sir Pierre unlocked the emblazoned door, Lord Darcy said, Who else sleeps on this floor? No one else, your lordship, Sir Pierre said. The entire floor was reserved for my lord the Count. Is there any way up beside that elevator? Sir Pierre turned and pointed toward the other end of the short hallway. That leads to the staircase, he said, pointing to a massive oaken door. But it is kept locked at all times. And as you can see, there's a heavy bar across it. Except for moving furniture in and out or something like that, it's never used. No other way up or down, then? Sir Pierre hesitated. Well, yes, your lordship, there is. I'll show you. A secret stairway? Yes, your lordship. Very well. We'll look at it after we've seen the body. Lord Darcy, having spent an hour on the train down from Rouen, was anxious to see the cause of the trouble at last. He lay in the bedroom just as Sir Pierre and Father Bright had left him. "If you please, Dr. Patterly," said his lordship. He knelt on one side of the corpse and watched carefully while Patterly knelt on the other side and looked at the face of the dead man. Then he touched one of the hands and tried to move an arm. "Rigor has set in, even to the fingers. Single bullet hole, rather small caliber. I would say a 28 or 34. Hard to tell until I've probed out the bullet. Looks like it went right through the heart, though. Hard to tell about powder burns. The blood has soaked the clothing and dried. Still, these specks. Yes. Lord Darcy's eyes took in everything, but there was little enough to see on the body itself. Then his eye was caught by something that gave off a golden gleam. He stood up and walked over to the great canopied four-poster bed. Then he was on his knees again, peering under it. A coin? No. He picked it up carefully and looked at it. A button. Gold. Intricately engraved in an arabesque pattern and set in the center with a single diamond. How long had it lain there? Where had it come from? Not from the Count's clothing, for his buttons were smaller, engraved with his arms, and had no gems. Had a man or woman dropped it? There was no way of knowing at this stage of the game. Darcy turned to Sir Pierre. "When was this room last cleaned?" "Last evening, your lordship," the secretary said promptly. "My lord was always particular about that. The suite was always to be swept and cleaned during the dinner hour." "Then this must have rolled under the bed at some time after dinner. Do you recognize it? The design is distinctive." The Privy Secretary looked carefully at the button in the palm of Lord Darcy's hand without touching it. I hesitate to say," he said at last. "It looks like, but I'm not sure." Come, Chevalier. Where do you think you might have seen it, or one like it?" There was a sharpness in the tone of his voice. "I'm not trying to conceal anything, your lordship," Sir Pierre said with equal sharpness. "I said I was not sure. I still am not, but it can be checked easily enough, if your lordship will permit me." He turned and spoke to Dr. Patterly, who was still kneeling by the body. "May I have my lord the Count's keys, doctor?" Patterly glanced up at Lord Darcy, who nodded silently. The physician detached the keys from the belt and handed them to Sir Pierre. The private secretary looked at them for a moment, then selected a small gold key. "This is it," he said, separating it from the others on the ring. "Come with me, your lordship." This ends the first installment of The Eyes Have It by Randall Garrett. Be sure to come back next week for Colbycast 27 and the second installment of The Eyes Have It.
This has been a Colbycast episode.
This work is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it, link it, blog it, talk about it. As Woody Guthrie said, this song is copyrighted in the U.S. under seal of copyright number 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anybody caught singing it without our permission will be a mighty good friend to ourn, because we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it. We wrote it, that's all we wanted to do.